Hi, Doug. Thanks so much for agreeing to do this video chat. I think the Half Earth Educator Ambassador is going to be really interesting to hear this conversation. I wanted to start off by, asking you how you're doing. We're obviously in the midst of this coronavirus crisis.
Right. We are totally sequestered, have been for several days. But I'm sequestered on a beautiful 10 acres. And it is springtime, and it's the first time I have been home in the spring in years. And I have to say, I mean, there are downsides, but I'm enjoying it.
Right.
Just before I talked to you, I was outside walking around, pulling up a few Oriental bittersweet and doing the things that I say, that's got to be done. That's got to be done all the time. So right. I'm doing it. It's good.
That's so great. So you have 10 acres. I was going to ask you later, but since you've mentioned it, I'll ask you in a bit to introduce yourself, but let's start out and talk about that 10 acres a little bit. Tell me about your property.
Well, it's 10 acres in Oxford, Pennsylvania. It's a farm that was broken up into 10-acre units, and we bought one of the units. It had been mowed for hay for years. I mean, it's been in farming for over 250 years, and it just farmed to death. But it was out of mowing several years before we actually built a house and moved in. So what came in, of course, were all the invasive species, and it was just clogged. We still have a fair amount, but with Oriental bittersweet and Japanese honeysuckle and multiflora rose and autumn olive, and now we've got porcelain berry and Japanese stiltgrass, and they're all here. So the major challenge has been getting those under control.
Right.
But we've been here. This is our 20th year. They are under control, and it's been a beautiful experiment to see what happens when you take the Asian species that really are not adapted to this area. I mean, they can grow here fine, but they are not in tune with anything else. So they're not supporting the food webs that drive our ecosystems. And when you take them out and the native plants come back in, you get to see life return, and that's really rewarding.
And you've seen that happen in just 10 years of working this piece of land.
20 years, but we've seen it happen. I mean, it didn't take 20 years. It started happening right away. And every year we add new species. I'm counting the moth species that we have at our house, and I'm up to 910. But every time I go out and count again, I get new ones. So we're entering a new season. It'll top out over 1,000 for sure. It's very therapeutic. I recommend it to everybody. Yeah. It's also addictive, so be careful.
That's terrific. Why is it? Why is the number of moth species important? Why does that please you so much?
Okay, that's a great question, because every moth came from a caterpillar, and it's caterpillars that are they're the nuts and bolts of our local food webs. Most birds are rearing their young on caterpillars. So many things eat them because they're so edible. They're soft and they're nutritious and they're abundant, and they're taking more plant material and transferring it to other animals than any other type of insect or any other type of animal. So when you have a lot of caterpillars around, you have a vibrant ecosystem. And then we can see it in the birds that come. We've been counting the number of bird species that have bred on our 10 acres, and we're up to 55 species. So again, enormously rewarding if you like the life around you. Right. I do run into people say, I don't want any birds because they poop on my car. Well,
Right. Well, we can work on bringing them along. Maybe we can offer some free car washes. Well, yes. That's a great. So let me back into the introduction then. So you're not just some, random landowner who decided to revitalize this old farm. Just give me a quick thumbnail of who you are, professionally.
Well, I'm an entomologist at the University of Delaware. This is now my 40th year, and I've worked in a number of entomological issues. I'd really people think entomology is a very narrow field, but it's not actually. And within the field of entomology, I'm a behavioral ecologist, so I study insect behavior, the evolution of behavior, with a focus on how they interact with plants. So there you go, plant-insect interactions. And that, of course, is what is running life on planet Earth. So turns out to be a really important field that I didn't realize when I went into it. But the more you learn, you say, ooh, this is important stuff. And what's really important is to see how we've abused it. We do everything we can to switch out native plant communities and to kill all the insects around us. That is not a key to success. So our research in recent years has been focused on documenting that and convincing people that that is a very poor approach to sustainability on planet Earth. And how can we turn it around?
Yeah. So I'm going to hold up a copy of your book here, which you published a few years back, Bringing Nature Home. Can you just tell me, what's the main message of the book? Why did you write it? Did it come more out of being an entomologist, or more out of working on this, revitalizing this farm you bought?
Well, actually, buying the piece of the farm is what stimulated my interest in this area. Before, I was interested in mating behavior, cucumber beetle mating behavior, and other things. But one of the things we noticed with all these invasive plants, mostly from Asia, is that insects weren't eating them. So I said, well, that'll make an interesting undergraduate research project to compare insect herbivory on native and non-native plants. I did not think this was news, because we learned about how host-specific insects are way back in the 70s. And of course, it's not a surprise that our native insects don't do really well on Chinese plants. They're just not adapted to them.
So they're literally not adapted to eating them. They don't recognize them as food. They can't get nutrition from these plants.
Yeah, insects find their host plants through chemistry. So it's got to smell right, it's got to taste right. They have to have the physiological adaptations to be able to digest that plant, to eat it without dying, because all plants are protecting themselves with toxins, toxins or anti-digestibility compounds. So insects have to be physiologically adapted to be able to consume those plants and thrive. And that takes a long period of what we call coevolution. The plant and the insect are evolving together. The example I always use would be the monarch butterfly and milkweed. Milkweed's a toxic plant. If you eat a lot of milkweeds, cardiac glycosides in those milkweeds will stop your heart. So it's very effective. I don't suggest you try it, but
don't recommend a milkweed salad for
the monarch, of course, has the adaptations, and they also have the behavioral adaptations to get around the milky latex sap that comes out when you break open a milkweed leaf. If that hardens on the monarch's mouth parts, it glues their mouth shut, and then they starve to death. So they have to eat the plant without exposing themselves to that. That's tricky stuff that takes a long time to evolve the ability to get around those defenses. But that's true of almost 90% of the insects that eat plants. They're host plant specialists. So when you bring in a plant lineage from some other place, most of the time our insects don't have the adaptations to be able to handle that. There are some exceptions, but again, about 90% of our insects are really restricted to the plant lineage they co-evolved with. So we saw this happening at home. What was interesting is that other people weren't thinking about that in terms of all the non-native ornamentals that we use, the invasive. Many of those ornamentals have escaped and become our serious invasive plants. About 86% of our woody invasives are escapees from our garden.
Wow.
So we've restructured the plant communities around us, where about 30% of the plants in our natural systems are from another continent. So
right.
So it's green, and people drive by and they say, "Well, that looks good." I guess it does look good, but it's not functional, and that it's not supporting the insect populations that the birds need and that drive those food webs. So it became a goal to start quantifying the impact of these non-native plants on food webs. We got some grant support to do that. And it was fun and exciting. The downside was it was bad news. I mean, we measured, a recent experiment measured caterpillars in hedgerows that were invaded with typical invasives around here, and compared it to caterpillars in uninvaded hedgerows, which are hard to find, but we did find a couple. 96% reduction in caterpillar biomass. So that's, it's a dead zone because these plants are not the ones that our insects co-evolved with.
And so that's taking food out of the mouths of birds, of native birds.
Yeah.
And other
That's like putting a bird feeder out and taking 96% of the seeds out and watching how well your birds do.
Right.
And this is, of course, during the time when they're trying to raise young. Our birds are rearing their young on insects. And again, most of those insects are caterpillars. And it's thousands of caterpillars to make one clutch. 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to make one clutch of chickadees, tiny bird. And that's typical for birds. And you want chickadees breeding in your yard, you've got to have 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars for each nest in your yard, because they're not flying down the rows to get food. It's got to be within about 50 meters of the nest. So those are the type of stats that we've been generating to give to the public to say, those of you who do want chickadees, and it's a lot of people do like birds. They like the life around them. This is what you have to do to your yard. You don't have to take your crepe myrtle out, which is making no caterpillars, but you do have to add your oak tree, which is supporting 557 species of caterpillars, and rebuild that food web. The great thing about it is that, by the way, here's an acorn. That's how you do it.
That's where you start.
It's cheap and it's easy.
Yeah.
I just lost my train of thought with my acorn. But
let me ask you, no, that's terrific. I think I like that, you're making a couple points there. One is that you don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to give up some of the ornamentals you like. But I also wanted to ask you, there's this effect of yard by yard, park by park, even say schoolyard. But I think part of your argument in your book is that adds up to something really significant. We all tend, the Half Earth Project is, of course, focused on documenting where we have areas that are protected specifically for biodiversity. We want to add more of that land and manage that land across the globe better. But you're talking about an alternative, a complementary approach.
Complementary, right? Not alternative. I want to fill in the spaces between those protected areas. All those human-dominated landscapes, all the roadsides, all the airport rights of ways, the power line rights of ways, all of the urban and suburban and ex-urban yards that we have. You added up all those spaces, it's about 599 million acres in the US without touching agriculture. Agriculture can be improved too, but if we don't touch agriculture, we've got a lot of places to work with that we have never thought of as sites for conservation.
Right, and that's all be done voluntarily. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I turn to the private landowner because most of the land in the U.S. is privately owned. East of the Mississippi, it's 86% privately owned. So if each private landowner said, I'm gonna increase the ecological integrity of the land I own, we're 86% done. And then it's much more manageable. You don't have to say, well, I got to fix the world. We do have to fix the world, but it's a big job for any one person. But fixing the property you own is manageable. And if you own a lot of property, you hire some help. But so, what do we have to do to fix it? Those are the things we're working on. And that's why I wrote the second book.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you. So the first book was really popular, and my understanding is really, garden enthusiasts, garden fanatics is partly what helped drive that. I have to say, your ideas have made me really think harder about my own yard. I've always done a little bit of native plants, but now I'm inspired to do more. So here I've got your recent book, and what moved you to write this book, and what are you sort of adding to the story, to the case here?
Well, almost all the research we have done on this subject happened after I wrote Bringing Nature Home. And we had done a little bit at that point. And I wrote Bringing Nature Home because I was starting to give talks about it, and people said, we want to read something. So it really outlined, it was a big hypothesis. This is what theory predicts about how insects are interacting with plants, and why the plants we're using to decorate our landscapes are not going to do the job. But the big research projects hadn't been done yet. We didn't have the numbers. Well, over the last 12 years, we've gotten a lot of numbers, and and they're powerful arguments. And at the same time, we're getting, the news is getting worse. So we hear about insect Armageddon. We hear about missing 3 billion birds, and the UN predicts 1 million species going to disappear. None of these things are acceptable. And the public's response is alarm. They're ready to do something, to participate. What we've seen happen at our house convinces me that that it works, that putting in productive plants in your landscape, no matter how big or small it is, works, which means you get to see positive feedback from your actions. We have big environmental issues out there, but this is one where one person can act and see the difference, and that's what we need. That's where the hope comes from. We need hope that we can actually turn this around, and when you see it working, that gives you that hope. It also brings in the masses. Again, this is something we all have to do. So it's not the individual who's going to play in their garden. It's everybody. And if you don't own any land, the people who do are desperate for help, volunteer help. The park managers, everybody doesn't have the funds to do this. A lot of it is labor intensive. So the 82% of us who live in cities but don't actually own property, there's a big role for those people as well. So the second book is a call to action that we can turn these things around, but we have to start soon.
Yeah, that's terrific. I'm gonna put on my I'm gonna put on my Half Earth cap, and so one of the things, you and the publisher were really generous. Here's the book again, and you gave us permission to post the first chapter of the book on our website, and to put it among our various resources for our educator ambassador group. So I'd like to ask you to just give me a quick, so chapter 1, you call it The Dreamers, I think, right?
Right.
And it really features E.O. Wilson and Aldo Leopold. So maybe you just tell me, give me the thumbnail version of why they were so inspiring to you, why you wanted to have them in the first chapter.
Well, they're both, I don't know how we're going to divide it up, but they're the fathers of modern conservation, and they both had dreams. Aldo Leopold had the dream of developing a land ethic, that we could actually learn to interact with the land around us without spoiling it. He didn't have a big track record to go on because we humans have never been able to do that. We just spoil it and move someplace else. Well, that's not an option anymore, and he recognized that. And of course, Wilson, the Half Earth sums it up. I mean, he's been trying to save biodiversity his entire career, and Half Earth says, here is the science that says this is how much of the Earth we have to have functional ecosystems on. Those are the dreams, but it struck me that it's a great lead-in to what I've been thinking about, in that this is a mechanism for achieving those dreams. Because poor Aldo died before his Sand County Almanac was even published.
Right, fighting a brush fire, I think. Right.
He had a heart attack while he was fighting it. Yeah. So too bad he didn't get to see how much he changed the field. He also, his vision seemed to be restricted though to the places where we farm and where we hunt and where we mine and where we were using the land, but he didn't talk about where we lived. Mm-hmm. The notion that humans and nature can't live together is so deeply ingrained in our culture that he didn't seem to recognize it as an option.
Right.
Well, I'm saying it's our only option at this point because we're everywhere. Mm-hmm. Yes, we're using the land everywhere, but we're you know, our footprint is just huge, even if we're not living there. And if we didn't see those places as, if we did see them as targets of conservation, we can do a whole lot better. Now, we're not going to, you know, you're not going to have the bison running down your street. Most people won't accept wolf packs and things, but there's an awful lot of nature. And in terms of number of species, the bulk of it is compatible with human societies. So,
yeah. Well, that's, I mean, we're so aware in our work with the various communities and stakeholders that have to be engaged to make, you know, to make this, to really make a difference, to make it have the kind of scale that we'd like it to have. And we're grateful that Ed is alive to see this starting to happen. You had, when we had met originally, you had told me a couple of stories about, you know, how you'd met Ed a couple times. Do you want to just do a quick version of one or both of those?
sure. Well, the first time was way back in 1982. There was a small conference on social insects in Boulder, Colorado. And it was small enough that at break time, people just went outside and milled around. Well, I had just started my career at University of Delaware, and you know, just to be in the same room with E.O. Wilson was a big deal. But I walked outside, and here he's sitting on the curb, and nobody was sitting next to him. I'm actually a shy guy, but I got up the nerve. I went over and I sat next to the great E.O. Wilson, and he turned, he looked at me, and he said, "Hi, I'm Ed Wilson. I don't believe we met." And we shook hands, you know, and talked for a few minutes. Then the break was over, and then there were more talks and lunch and more talks, and then another break in the afternoon. Went outside, and here's EO sitting on the curb, and nobody's sitting next to him. So we were buddies now, you know. So I went over, I sat next to him, he turned and looked at me, and he said, "Hi, I'm Ed Wilson. I don't believe we met," you know.
Well,
32 years later, he was getting the Ben Franklin Award in the Academy of Sciences in Philadelphia. So I met him again. I did not remind him that we were buddies. Nothing funny happened there, but it was just an honor to see him again. And
yeah,
I hope I get a chance a third time.
that's terrific. Yeah, well, we're going to work on that. That's great. We'll all be able to meet in person again soon. So that's really terrific. Yeah, I mean, I think in closing, you know, I'm just so encouraged that your books have been popular, right? That people want to learn about this and want to engage with this, and they want to know what they can do. And so, you know, this is primarily aimed at educators and students. And I'm just wondering, do you have anything that you'd like to say to teachers in particular, to students?
And I think the central message has to be that each individual is important in this. You are critical to the future of conservation, even though most individuals do not see themselves that way. They don't see that they have a role at all.
Yeah.
One of our mistakes has been to leave Earth stewardship to a few professionals. Nobody else has a role in it. That's great. You know, this is our nest. None of us have the right to spoil it, and we all have a role in protecting it. So getting that message across and saying, not only do you have an important role in conservation, but here are some very simple things you can do. That's the message.
Yep, that's terrific. Well, that's, I think that's good. Did we leave anything out? We're going to have to edit it down. I was hoping, I'm hoping to make these on the order of, you know, 5 minutes, but, you know, it's tough, and you've got some real meat there. So do you feel we missed anything important?
Well, it's a long book, but I think you get the message across.
Yeah. Well, we can get you on another one, you know, if we need to. I'm really hoping that, I'm hoping this will engage teachers, and they may have some questions, their students may have some questions. So
sure, you can put one together with questions. You know, here are 5 important questions. What do we do with them?
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Good.
Okay. Well, let's see. I'm gonna end the recording here.